Thank you all for watching this video presentation of our CSCW paper, where we reflect on the methodological implications of pursuing an asset-based participatory approach to design. Specifically, in this paper, we explore how designing with communities from an asset-based perspective is not so much a technology creation journey, but a journey towards becoming a collective of asset-based thinkers. This work was done in collaboration with Betsy DiSalvo from Georgia Tech and Deborah Tatar from Virginia Tech. We'd like to start off this presentation by offering a brief summary of how the fields of SIGCHI and CSCW have progressively engaged in designing technologies with communities. Approaches such as post-colonial computing urge us to pay attention to how the communities are included in the design process, what elements of their situation are considered, and how are those considerations translated into design. Two distinct approaches emerged from SIGCHI literature describing how the field engages, articulates, and translates with the communities. First, a deficit-focused, need-based approach, and second, an asset-based approach. Need-focused approaches are guided by the community's needs. It sees technology design as a fix to the community's various lacks or deficits. They are assessed based on how much of the population needs have been met. The approach is quite common in international development and can also be seen embodied in human-centered design's need-finding exercise. However, various scholars in community development and education argue that focusing exclusively on needs or deficits perpetuate dependency and rob agency from actors who can bring about change. The second approach focuses on the assets, such as the resources and local knowledge already available to the community members to bring about change. As Alison Maffey and others argue, taking such an approach encourages power within, power to, and power with, and it resists having power over the community. Interest in asset-based approach has been growing within SIGCHI. We extend the scholarship by reflecting and examining what it means to involve communities in a long-term asset-based engagement using participatory methods. Particularly, we reflect on two of our asset-based design experiences to examine in depth the methodological challenges that arise when co-designing with communities and their assets. We also reflect on how prioritizing the community's assets shapes the use of the participatory methods.
The assets-based experiences we leverage for this work involve two quite different communities. We have been working on these engagements separately for the last 4+ years. We note that these are not perfect examples of assets-based design. We have no secret recipes to offer. Rather, we reflect on our experiences to highlight our shared commitments and its implications for researchers. I worked with Latin American immigrant parents in Atlanta, United States, who were struggling to be actively involved in their children's education due to various systemic factors. Aakash worked with an anti-trafficking organization in Nepal and the sex trafficking survivors supported by the organization who were striving to achieve what they call dignified reintegration into Nepalese society. My engagement responded to the historic troubling relation that Latin American immigrant parents in the US have with the country's educational system. In the United States, the largest group of immigrants are from Latin American countries. Despite their prevalence, the existing educational system has not been adapted and geared to facilitate the parents' access and use of information for supporting their children. Systemic factors drive schools to rather blame the parents, frequently labeling them as uncaring and imposing technological and information practices that further hinder parents' possibilities to support their children. My work sought to challenge this belief system by looking at the larger educational ecosystem and examining how parents can leverage their assets to engage with actors in the ecology. I conducted various activities to work with parents in envisioning pathways to change the situation. This included a 2-year ethnographic study, followed by a series of participatory activities that encourage parents to reflect on their assets and possible uses, both individually and collectively.
My asset-based engagement took place in Nepal, where sex trafficking survivors are vulnerable due to various reasons. Many are young, often illiterate, and many have been shunned by their families. The survivors are dependent on anti-trafficking organizations for support. Anti-trafficking organizations themselves are influenced by donor organizations, which require them to promote needs and perpetuate dependency in order to get grants. Survivors, however, do have assets. My work has sought to identify and build on those identified assets as a way for the survivors to be in a position of greater power within the organization and beyond. Building on an initial ethnographic study, I facilitated a series of participatory activities. Critical to note here is that unlike in Marisol's case, technology was prominently present in my work. This stemmed from the fact that the survivors aspired to learn technology and the organizations wanted to explore possibilities around technology. Nonetheless, the emphasis remained on prioritizing assets using those technologies. We find that despite the differences in setting and motivations, we both saw asset-based design as the process of working with participants in co-constructing a collective of asset-based thinkers. These collectives engage in an ongoing process of collaboratively fostering a critical attachment to their available and attainable assets. This entails, first, prioritizing an identification and appreciation of assets as a source of power from within. Second, examining how assets operate realistically within the broader context, shaping their everyday situation of oppression and marginalization. And third, supporting each other in defining and pursuing learning goals about their assets.
Reflecting on the engagements, we identified 3 shared commitments that guided our methodological decisions. For the purpose of this short presentation, we share a few examples of how we enacted these commitments. The paper contains richer and thicker descriptions and examples. The first commitment involved promoting trust throughout the journey. Unveiling the whys and the hows of assets and their limitations can be an emotionally complex process and requires care in maximizing the participant's sense of control in their participation with us. To that end, we argue for carefully choosing materials and context in the methods we use. We also foster trust by negotiating the method's shape and form with participants. While doing so, we made sure that assets-based learning goals were at the fore. For instance, when a community partner asked me to teach a technology workshop to parents in the community, I expressed a concern that teaching skills alone could hinder opportunities to illuminate the parents' already existing assets. We then negotiated the end goal and decided that the workshop would promote critical learning of assets in relation to parenting technologies. The second commitment involved building an interdependent collective where individuals can help one another engage with the assets available to them. In our work, this entailed using methods that illuminated how the individual's assets were related to those of the collective and leading to a critical analysis of how collective assets operate. For example, in my case, I designed an activity where participants collectively analyzed word clouds with the words they had each identified as assets and challenges, respectively. This activity also allowed for the complexity of parents' assets and limitations to emerge and be further discussed amongst the whole group.
The third commitment revolves around embracing participatory methods that help participants to appreciate small incremental transformations in terms of valuing assets and imagining how to use them for challenging existing structures of marginalization. For example, while I introduced technologies, the activities were designed to leverage technology as a means to amplify existing assets and move towards more enduring ones. For instance, when I introduced a tailored web application contextualized around crafting, it supported the participants in developing awareness of their existing crafting practices and in realizing themselves as being capable of attaining futures that they had not considered feasible before. While this change in thinking might not be visible or measurable, we argue that it is critical when moving towards asset-based possibilities. Finally, we'd like to share the deeper implications that these commitments may entail for researchers interested in undertaking asset-based design with vulnerable communities. First, a significant amount of work is required before the design work. This involves forming relationships with different stakeholders, understanding their various goals and values, and identifying ways to naturally stitch previous findings so as to promote continuous reflections on those assets. Second, we argue that technology can only be a means and not an end in an asset-based engagement. While technology can be useful and in fact desired, exploration and examination of the assets have to be the first and foremost priority. We see technology playing a role as a means to learn about assets and in supporting individuals and the group to grow their identified assets. Finally, we argue that asset-based design is incremental and involves slow transformation. The process requires carefully reflecting on assets and collectively envisioning ways to leverage those assets. These do not result in immediate changes. This has several significant challenges, including the fact that we as academics often measure our productivity in terms of paper published, but in undertaking a slow transformation process, such as in an asset-based design, it necessitates us to reevaluate what it means to be productive. Thank you for staying with us till the end. We'd be happy to discuss the work further.